Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you find yourself watching this. My name is Kevin, and welcome to Suzuka. Nestled in the Mie prefecture of Japan, welcome back to Suzuka Circuit in iRacing for this week's track guide and hot lap analysis in the SuperFormula car. With 18 corners in 5.8 kilometers, Suzuka is an absolute mythical track to drive, especially in these super light, high downforce producing SuperFormula cars. We have the Suzuka S's in Sector 1 testing your precision and accuracy with the front axle. Then the high speed, high commitment Degna curves, the tricky curved braking zone into the hairpin, the long never ending spoon curve, and of course the infamous 130R. It's no wonder why this circuit is loved by both drivers in real life and in the sim. In this track guide video, I'm going to be breaking down and analyzing my fastest lap set during an official fixed race session for you, to provide reference points, insights, and knowledge for you to take away and implement into your own driving. So without further ado, like last week, we'll start things off with an uncut hot lap from the cockpit view, followed by the corner-by-corner analysis with all the reference points and tips throughout the lap. First off here, we can take a look at the track and weather conditions. As mentioned before, this lap was set during an official fixed race, so using the fixed setup in the 10-lap sprint. As for the weather, we have 23 degrees ambient temperature, 40 degree track temperature, with a 15 km/h wind from the southeast. Heading over to our lap history, in qualifying, our opening lap was a 1 minute 36.8, followed by an improvement to a 36.3. As for the race, we can see quite a consistent pace. Given that the track temperature is nearly 20 degrees warmer than it was at Portimao last week, we no longer see lap-on-lap improvement as the tires come up to temperature. Rather, after the first few laps, the pace levels off at around that 37.0, 37.1 mark. It's only once we turn on the OTS that we drop an additional second to get down to a 36.0, 36.1. One final thing of note here is that I'll also be providing my qualifying onboard lap. I found that quite a few corners were taken differently during qualifying due to the excess grip available, and I will also point this out during the track guide. Alright, heading into the first turn consisting of quarter numbers 1 and 2. We are going to use this 50 board as a turn-in reference. That's when we're going to start slowly turning the car into the apex of turn 1. Once we get the car into the corner, you're going to notice the natural banking and cambering of the corner. This is just going to allow us to carry an additional amount of speed without the front end starting to feel like it's losing grip. The apex here is right at the midpoint of this curb when the black markings start to form. This will also double as our braking point, where we're going to slowly roll into the brakes to about 50% and commence just a natural trail braking to keep the front end loaded as we come around for the apex of 2. The next two things to focus on are line and the downshift pattern. We don't want to run up onto the exit curbing with our left-hand wheels, as the 3D curbs is just going to unsettle and unweight the front axle, causing us to understeer and never be able to hit our apex for turn 2. As for the downshift pattern, we are going to drop 3 gears down to 3rd gear, but we're going to do this very slowly, as too quickly will initiate too much engine braking and kill our minimum speed, once again peeling the aero off the car and causing a bit of excess understeer. The apex here is going to be once the black tire marks start to form on the red apex curbing. That's when we're going to start feeding in throttle again to accelerate out of the exit of turn 2. We can run up onto the exit curbing but no further, and a quick short shift to 4th concludes turn 2. Now, heading into the Suzuka S's. 2 left, 2 to the right, turns 3 to 7. The secret to this barrage of corners comes down to sequencing. We want to make sure that we are always able to get on throttle as we are passing by the apex of every single corner. We need to be lifting out of the previous corners to help position and rotate the car as we need, and stay ahead of every single corner. You'll notice that if we make one mistake or fall behind in this sequence, that we are going to start sacrificing minimum speed and start to bleed a lot of time throughout this sector. The turn-in point for 3 is going to be this black barrier on the right. We're going to leave the car in 5th, turn the car in nice and smoothly, and get into the apex of 3 nice and early. The apex is going to be the midpoint of the curb on the left. In qualifying, turn 3 will be flat. However, throughout the races, I found that a little lift before the apex of 3 just helped the front from unnecessarily scrubbing. As the S's are very front axle demanding, anything we can do to minimize unnecessary scrub and generate surface temp on the tire will benefit us greatly throughout the rest of the sector. Once we're past the apex of 3, we're going to continue holding that steering lock on to position the car mid-track for the entry of turn 4. For the rest of the S's, there aren't a great amount of features on the track that we can pick out as reference points, so it will come down more so to the feel and rhythm of driving. For turn 4 here, we're going to tap the brakes, downshift into 4th, and get the car in for a late apex. The apex here will be once those black markings start to show up on the curb. That's when we can start to nudge up onto it. As we're passing by the apex, we can start to feed on a good amount of throttle, open up the wheel, and do our best to leave one car's width to the inside white line before lifting again and turning in for turn 5. One thing to keep in mind here is that if you're too aggressive with the throttle application and constantly spinning up the rear axle, you will spike the surface temperature of the rear tires and take away the grip and stability that you need to complete the S's. That will generate a lot of rear instability, and it will become a compounding issue as you slide around more and more. We're not actually going to trail brake for the entry of turn 5, instead we're going to just let the car roll. This is because the uphill gradient here is going to naturally load up the front axle and do the work for us anyways. The apex here is once the green AstroTurf on the apex curbing starts. that's when we can start to think about feeding the throttle back in. We're going to hold the steering lock as we feed the throttle back in. This way we can position the car and give us that one car's width to the white line on the entry for turn 6. Opposite to turn 5, turn 6 is now downhill. So instead of letting the car roll through here, we will use our toe pressure on the brake just to keep the front axle a little bit more loaded. It is critical here that we do not let the minimum speed drop any more than it has to, as we're right at that threshold where the car is producing the downforce to keep us online. If we continue to kill speed, the front will start to go light and we will begin to understeer offline. The apex of 6 is rather long. We get into the apex curbing and hug the curb throughout the entirety of the corner, and once we start to pick up throttle, that's when we depart the curb. We're going to enter and turn in from mid-track for turn 7. There's no real need to go out crazy wide, as we just put our outside wheels in the dirty part of the circuit and risk losing the rear. Turn 7 is another example of a corner that can be done flat in qualifying, but you have to have that small breathe off the throttle during your race laps. It just helps with stopping the front axle from scrubbing and understeering yourself off the track. Once we find our apex, we can start feeding the throttle back into 100% and trusting that the car will stick on exit. We need to resist the temptation to crank on additional steering lock throughout the exit here, as that will generate front scrub and put us at risk of going off track. The exit of turn 7, the final turn in the S's, marks the end of Sector 1. Sector 1 is the S's, that's where the focus should be in finding time, and it boils back down to sequencing and the discipline in steering technique and carrying that minimum speed. Sequencing just means that we're making sure that we are accelerating out of every corner and prepping for the following corner. This will just help us with carrying good minimum speed and picking up throttle when we should be. Lastly, when it comes to steering angle, we do not want to be applying any more steering lock than we need to be. We need to be light in the hands to have good feel over what the front axle is doing and not cause it to go into scrub. Scrubbing the front will just cause an excess amount of temperature to build up on the surface of the tire. It will kill our tire wear throughout the race and take away the grip that we need in this very front limited sector. At the start of Sector 2, we are met by the 2 Degna curves, which will test your commitment in the car. We will use a point after the 50 board to start turning in for Degna 1 before tapping the brakes and downshifting into 5th. 2 things are very critical here, that we carry a decent amount of speed into the corner and get really close to the apex curb. The apex of turn 8 is going to be the midpoint of the curb on the right, which doubles as our point to start getting back on throttle. Our attention should now shift to how much track usage we're going to be using on the exit, as well as the braking point for turn 9, Degna 2. We want to make sure that we're letting the car run out all the way onto the green painted curb on the left, but not any further, as we risk bottoming the plank of the car on the curb, being unable to brake, and sending ourselves into the barrier. As soon as we're done using that bit of curb for the exit of 8, we want to aggressively bring the car back onto the circuit so that the left-hand wheels are on the painted white line, and that will double as our braking point for turn 9. It's critical here that we don't brake on the painted red and white curbing, as these are 3D curbs and we won't have the braking performance to get the car slowed down in time. We're going to hit the brakes hard and quickly, peak the pressure at 100%, downshift 2 gears, start peeling out of the brake, and carry a lot of speed on the entry of the corner. The cambering is really going to help us here, and the aero is really working. The apex is going to be the midpoint of the curb on the right. That's when we can start feeding the throttle back in and building the speed for the exit. As we unwind the wheel for the exit, we want to make sure that we're running up only to the green painted curb again. The height of the curb here means that any further and we will bottom out the car on the curb, light up the rear axle, and completely lose our traction for the exit. The right hand kink is considered turn 10, it is easy flat, and we have one job, getting a super late apex to straighten up the braking zone for turn 11, the hairpin. We're going to leave the car in 5th and then hit the brakes a car length after the curb on the right hand side. We're going to hit the brakes to 100%, then hold a high mid-range pressure to really slow down the car while we have it straight here. a bit of cambering starts to form into the hairpin, and it becomes easy to lock an inside front, underslow the car, and overshoot the entry of the corner. We will get down all the way to first gear as we roll past the apex of the corner, which is about the midpoint of the curb on the left-hand side. This will help with the rotation and making sure that the car is fully turned and we can be unwinding the wheel for the exit of the corner. We will throw second gear before we even get on throttle to help with the traction, and then immediately start unwinding the wheel as we put on more throttle. Getting a good exit out of the hairpin will net us a lot of time, as the time on full throttle that follows is quite long, and it all comes down to the management of slip on acceleration. Not spinning up the rear, but making sure that we are always feeding in the throttle. Make sure that you are bringing the car back to the right hand side before you hit the brakes and turn in for spoon curve, turns 13 and 14. Spoon in the SuperFormula is all about how you manage the platform as you continually lose speed and downforce through a decreasing radius turn. You need to be smooth and progressive with all inputs throughout the entirety of the corner, as any sort of jitter or shock will upset the platform of the vehicle and pull critical grip out of the car that you need to stay online and get on throttle early. When the grass turns yellow on the right hand side of the circuit, that's when we can hit the brakes and begin turning in for turn 13. It'll be a rather early apex as we don't need the car immediately rotated. We will only downshift one gear to 5th and try to carry as much speed as we can throughout 13. Slightly increase the steering angle, and this will be the steering angle that we set all the way down into the apex of turn 14. Pull a downshift into 4th, let the car run up onto the green painted curb before allowing the trail brake to bring you back to the inside of the corner. The downshift to 3rd acts as your final tool to set when you want to apex. The apex of 14 is quite early as you're going to be accelerating and on throttle throughout the exit of the corner. Again, this is another corner that is very aerocritical. You're right at that threshold of using the downforce. If you continue to bleed speed, you'll just scrub and push and delay your throttle pickup point. Whereas if you just begin to pick up throttle from that minimum speed and trust that the car will stick on exit, the car will live with the line that you choose. If you got all those variables right through spoon, you won't even need to use the green painted curb on the right. Instead, the car will just naturally push up onto the red and white curbing. High commitment and discipline in track usage through Degno 1 and 2, the hard braking zone and acceleration zone out of the hairpin, and the complex balancing act through spoon. This sector is what makes Suzuka a driver's track and where you can find the most amount of time on your rivals. With no variability in setup with high or low downforce setups, you can't bank on winning time in Sector 3, which is just all straights and one chicane. You need to make the time up out of the exits out of these corners, the hairpin and spoon. It's all about feeling the throttle and feeling the rear axle on the limit of slip as you continue to feed throttle. Out of the exit of spoon, it's all about picking up that throttle from a high minimum speed and feeling the car come alive as you accelerate and build the downforce on exit. You cannot afford to lose your minimum speed there, as the time on full throttle all the way down to 130R then into the chicane is far too long. The exit out of spoon is really crucial. Sector 3, as mentioned before, is all straights and one chicane. Through 130R, it is flat. The only thing you need to make sure to do is to get back to the left-hand side for the braking zone of the final chicane. The braking reference that we use here will be determined by the lap scenario that we are in. In this particular lap, we have the OTS burning away on an old degraded set of tires at the end of their stint. Our braking point is closer to the 100-meter board. Whereas in qualifying with fresh tires and light fuel load, no OTS, we can be pushing that braking zone deeper and closer to 70 or even 65 meters. Once we decide to hit the brakes, we're going to peak and hold the pressure at 100% for actually quite a while to really stop the car. The efficiency under braking here is what's going to net us the time. Then we're going to downshift 4 gears into second and pick our turn-in point. As this alternate layout begins, we can start to coax the car into the apex of the corner and throw half of the car onto the curb for this late apex. This will help rotate the car and position us well for the entry of turn 17 so that we can get on throttle nice and early for a strong exit down to the line. A quick shot of throttle between 16 and 17, the lift will time with when we turn in for 17, then we will again take another generous helping of curb at the apex to help rotate and position the vehicle. Then as soon as we depart from that curb, we can start feeding throttle on and rush ourselves to get back to full throttle, as turn 18 is easy flat and it's a short run to the finish. With Sector 3 being essentially a braking zone, a chicane, and a traction zone, you aren't going to find a ton of time in this sector. Especially in the fixed series with no high or low downforce setups, you can't rely on making or losing time throughout this sector. Instead, just focus on good braking performance into the chicane and a good exit out of turn 17. The only trick here is you can stay to the full right hand side of the circuit out of the exit of 18 to cut the distance to the line in qualifying laps. Speaking of qualifying, up next is my qualifying onboard. I found that there was a slight difference of driving style between qualifying and the race, with the surplus of grip available, being able to brake later and carry more speed through the corners. That concludes my Suzuka track guide video for this week. If you managed to stick around to this point, then I'm sure you have found something of value and hope that you see a positive difference in your driving. Thank you so much for watching, and until the next video,